What's up, everybody? I just had an orange. Today we're going to be talking about Elden Ring. I know I'm a little bit late to the party, but I had to play the game, and I don't get any special treatment because, well, no one's ever heard of me. I'm just going to go through my thoughts on the game, and we can talk about it, have a dialogue after my monologue. It's more of a monologue, really, if you think about it. It's sort of the nature of a YouTube video. Elden Ring is the first Souls game I have ever played. The internet told me it was too easy. It's not. Elden Ring brings all of the challenge I could have expected from the reputation of From Software and their video game. I never got into Dark Souls, Bloodborne, or Sekiro, so walking into Elden Ring, all I really knew was that I should expect to get my butt kicked from the very beginning, and I absolutely did. I'm about 40 hours into the game. I have not finished it yet, but I absolutely intend to, and I will be spending much of my free time between now and the next big video game release grinding this out to the end. That being said, I'm confident I have played enough of the game to properly review it and do it justice. I finally understand all the mechanics and the overall gameplay loop, and I've experienced it enough to be familiar with its twists, turns, and tricks. Now, from the top, I want you all to know that I really did like this game, but that came with a lot of caveats, which we will of course get into in a second. But before I lose you completely, I really like this game. First, let's talk about how absolutely gorgeous this game is. While it's not that impressive graphically, the art direction, world design, enemies, bosses, armor, weapons, almost everything except the fruit carts and barrels are designed beautifully. Several times in the first couple of hours of the game, I just went out and looked up at the sky to admire the great Erd tree and the surrounding vistas. The game has some pretty damn impressive visuals, and it knows it. Almost every time you enter a new area or turn a corner out of a deep, dark cave, you're right on the edge of a massive valley surrounded by Erd trees and mountains, lakes filled with tons of things to do. Now pair that art direction with a really compelling and eerie soundtrack that constantly has me on edge when I have no reason to be, and also has the nerve to keep me at peace when danger is lurking just around the corner. You've got a very well designed video game world. This world is filled with creatures that are just as well designed, and arguably just as enthralling. While I was unimpressed with the lack of friendly NPCs with interesting dialogue and even less interesting questlines, the game really leaves most of the storytelling up to your imagination or your complete drive to read every single description of every item in the game. The story is there, but it's buried, so for someone who is unwilling to do the digging, they at least have enough of the stuff to make me wonder how interesting it could be and to come up with things on my own. This open world is the gimmick, if you will, or the thing to really separate Elden Ring from the other FromSoft games. The design is very similar to the Souls games and oftentimes doesn't try to hide it, but that's okay because the thing that they use to separate the game is by making it actually quite different, but not keeping you on a linear path for most of the game. Almost right from the start, you're let loose into the world to explore and go pretty much any direction you want. North, south, east, west, pick one and go for it. Some directions won't get you far because of physical barriers, and others might stop you in your tracks just simply because of the intimidating enemies you'll encounter. But other directions lead to interesting and rewarding instances of combat, more dungeons, items, and quests to uncover. From the very beginning of the game, you can go west to the beach and discover a cave that takes you through an undersea tunnel to the Church of the Dragon Communion. You can go east and find a ruined outpost on a lake filled with enemies that die the moment you show up because a massive dragon attacks. You can go south and find a huge castle guarded by a golem, or you can go north and find a huge later game boss and follow the main story. But all of this is left up to your discretion. They subtly nudge you towards the north, but by no means do you have to go in that direction. That is one of the things that kept me thinking about this game every time I put it down, and even now as I talk about it, I'm itching to get back to the world and explore. From the day this game was released, people kept talking about how they just couldn't stop playing, about how this game had that thing, that X factor that kept them coming back. I think a huge part of that is the freedom of exploration you have right from the beginning. If you want to go straight in the first Legacy dungeon and fight Margit right away, then be my guest. But I went in there, got my butt kicked, and decided I would rather keep exploring and come back when I had leveled up a bunch. This is a big change for the Souls games. That normally when you get to a boss, you're stuck there until you can beat him. But in Elden Ring, you can leave that guy right where he is and go play for 50 hours and come back and throw him around like a rag doll. Reviewing this game without bringing up Breath of the Wild is either impossible or stupid, so here we go. The open world in this game differs from Breath of the Wild in a number of important ways. First, even though it is just about the same when it comes to encounters per square inch with plenty of places to go, Breath of the Wild offers much more variance in terms of encounters. It has combat encounters like Elden Ring, but it also really interesting side quests to do that lead to cool places or fun items or mini games. Characters that offer interesting lore or sometimes just a Korok, but most of the quests or side missions in the overworld of Elden Ring are simply just combat. Sometimes there are more interesting places or might have like a bit of different context, but for the most part it's just generic enemies to fight, to get runes, and sometimes an interesting item or an Ash of War. The next difference between these two open worlds is the way that Breath of the Wild very clearly and without telling you much at all leads you through tutorialized encounters that are meant for you to learn the game's implicit mechanics without ever having to give you a 6-paragraph dialogue box on where to find something or how to use it. Breath of the Wild shows you where to go without you knowing, and it's one of the reasons many people leave the first area and head straight to Kakariko Village just based on instinct. Elden Ring does have some of this subtle leading, but it's by no means as well executed as it is in Breath of the Wild. Not only does Elden Ring not give you explicit tutorials unless you follow the exact right path, but if you miss that path, you can miss those tutorials entirely, leading to a very frustrating first few hours of gameplay. And when that's mixed with the difficulty of the game, I would not be surprised if many people gave up on the game entirely before even making it to the first dungeon. There are so many essential tutorials and items that you can walk right by. The main tutorial area when you first wake up after your first death can be skipped completely. The crafting kit can be skipped easily. The whetstone knife, which is a very important and useful item, is hidden under a group of enemies who can all kill you in a couple of hits. And even if you wipe them out, you could still miss it. And that's just within the first hour of gameplay. You can completely miss another one of the most integral items in the game, the Flask of Wondrous Physic. This item allows you to mix certain pickups you get together in order to act as a healing potion, an FP potion, or give you all kinds of different buffs. I use this thing all the time, every gameplay session. And some players have just walked by it entirely without knowing what they were missing. Even after I picked it up, I had no idea what to do without talking to a friend who guided me through the process of the 4 or 5 menus you have to navigate to equip it and to use it. When you do encounter the tutorials, they are made of tiny white text on an ugly gold background that is anything but pleasant to read, just like the menus in this game, that you absolutely need to learn how to navigate and understand if you want to be any good at this game. The only reason I have learned to understand this game's mechanics at the point in the game that I am now is because of the many conversations I have had with friends experienced in the series, paired with the hours of YouTube videos I've watched explaining the differences between arcane and faith and intelligence, which I still don't really get, but I'm a samurai, so that doesn't matter anyway. Just a quick YouTube or Google search will result in hundreds of videos and articles about all the things you missed in Elden Ring. And they're not secrets or Easter eggs, they're just the basic things you need to play the game. The last example I will use is called the guard counter. This is a brand new mechanic to the game, and it is very useful in a fight. I was about 15 to 20 hours into the game and not understanding the combat, so I looked up a YouTube video that mentioned it, and at this point I had accepted that there was no way I was going to learn the game without looking up every question that popped into my head. But once I found out about the guard counter, I mentioned it to my friend who was much farther into the game than me and very experienced in Souls genre, and he didn't even know about it. I have to contrast this flaw in game design from the fact that the game is intentionally designed to be hard, because if I don't, I know that's the argument I will hear. Elden Ring is intentionally designed to be hard. Even low-level normal enemies can kill you if you aren't paying attention. You cannot mindlessly play through this game and the combat. If you let your guard down, you will die. The game has intentionally hidden things behind actual illusions that you would never expect. The very first boss in this game will kill you in a single hit. The item management on your body directly affects how quickly you can move and how many invincibility frames you get from your dodge roll. This game is intentionally designed to be hard, and that's okay. Now that we have that out of the way, the fact that you can miss tutorials so easily and items that are so important to the core mechanics of the game, even the way you're supposed to use and understand the core mechanics of the game itself is absolutely asinine. It is straight up bad game design. Even if it was an intentional choice, understanding what buttons to push, what stats are important, and how to play the freaking game should not be this hard. Learning how the pause menu and the inventory menu work should not be hard. When someone wants to play a game, the first thing you do is sit down with them and explain the rules. If you don't know the rules, you can't play the game. You can try, but you're not going to have any fun. The fact that I have to tell anyone I recommend this game to that they need to watch at least 30 minutes of YouTube to explain all the things that they would have no other way of knowing is absolutely ridiculous. I've talked to so many friends about this and heard lots of opinions online that say Elden Ring punishes you for not having played a Souls game before. But what I've determined is that's not actually true. All of the games are designed like this. If anything, you're rewarded by Elden Ring for having played Souls games before. But based on the way this game is selling, I can say with confidence that most people playing this game have never played a Souls game before. So it's not even kind of fair or okay that the game withholds basic information from you. Now, let's go back to Breath of the Wild for a second. This game doesn't tell you much either, not explicitly. However, it shows you everything you need to know within the first area and the surrounding second areas. Breath of the Wild is a masterclass in game design, and everyone I have watched play it for the first time gets it. Sometimes not right away, especially for people who don't play a lot of video games, but by the time you leave the Great Plateau or the tutorial area, you're ready to play Breath of the Wild. Everything you encounter from here on out is an evolution or an iteration of an idea or a mechanic that was introduced in the first area. Elden Ring has every opportunity to do this at the beginning of the game. They wouldn't need to change much because, like Breath of the Wild, they drop you into a closed area with a controlled environment. They could have forced you through a very easy 30-minute tutorial that teaches you what is important and why. Instead, they have an optional tutorial that is very easy to miss. Look how easily you can miss this. Now, to be fair, I understand that many people returning to the game won't want to sit through that tutorial. That's the exact criticism I have for most of the Pokemon games these days. I get it. I've played Pokemon before. Please stop talking to me about what a Pokemon is. It's totally fine. But if that's the case, they should have made the path for returning players the more obscure path, or had an option at the beginning of the game just to skip the tutorial. But I'm convinced, based on all the other things, that they chose not to explain it, and that is a symptom of the very same thing. It's just bad game design. But let's talk about some of the good and even great game designs in Elden Ring. The combat, once you've watched an hour of tutorials, and the dungeons. The combat in this game is some of the most challenging and equally rewarding I have ever experienced in a video game. It really seems to me that FromSoft has perfected their combat formula over the course of 5 or so games and given us what we have here in Elden Ring. The pace is not too slow, but it's methodical, and it's slow enough to give you a chance to think and react in real time. It punishes you for being too hasty or risky, but when you take a risk that pays off, it can mean the difference in winning a combat encounter even if you were behind. There are many unfair deaths in Elden Ring, but almost none of them happen in combat. There are tricks and traps that get you in the dungeons that you have no way of expecting, but in combat, every single death is explainable. It is almost always immediately clear what you did wrong and how you need to change your strategy. And if it isn't clear right away, it will be within a couple more attempts. The combat quality is not limited to the bosses either. While they are some of the best and hardest fights in the game, it is very easy to find a challenge outside of the dungeons. The open world has such diverse enemies with their own complete movesets that require memorizing and learning through trial and error in order to beat. The thing that might even make these combat encounters more exciting is that it's much easier to take them on the first try. So it can be rewarding to encounter a new type of enemy, pay close attention to the way that they attack and the openings they leave in order to take advantage of them. The dungeons provide a different challenge. While they don't provide as much as I would like in the way of puzzles and other things to do, they absolutely deliver when it comes to unique combat encounters. The way you can be ambushed in a room and have to react quickly and accordingly to fight more enemies than you expected is really quite thrilling. The higher level enemies you can find that aren't bosses but pack a bigger punch than the normal enemies can be exciting too. I found one dungeon very early on in my playthrough and I wanted to conquer this thing. After what seemed like forever, I finally made it all the way to the end, and at the end was a wall of fog and a boss behind it. with no checkpoint. I had finally made it all the way to the end of the dungeon by the skin of my teeth, and now it was asking me to fight a boss without any of my potions. Hell no. I hightailed it out of there, convinced I would never be able to finish that dungeon. But because of the great open world design, I had that choice. I left and I leveled up, and by the time I came back around to this dungeon, I was ready. After a couple of tries, I was able to take the whole dungeon, saving my flasks, and conquer the boss and leave triumphant. The boss fights in this game are the most challenging and the most rewarding. Margit the Fell Omen is one of the toughest bosses I have ever faced in a video game. I tried to fight this guy when I first came across him at the end of his dungeon. Knowing it was a Souls game, I knew I would be there for a while. I fought him close to 50 times in a row and kept getting slaughtered over and over. But each time I was able to get closer and closer and closer. Eventually, I decided to gather what little foolish ambition I had and return to the round table hold, upgrade my weapons, level up a little bit, and come back. And I learned how to use my spirits and the NPC summon. Within 5 more attempts, that big, ugly, flaky-faced, tail-swinging branch clutcher was done. I had never felt such relief after a single boss. All of the main bosses I have fought since then have offered a similar experience, but I've been able to beat them quicker and in fewer attempts as I learned to use my character to the best of his abilities. I'm really excited for the rest of the bosses that the game has for me. I would love to review the story, but man, they sure don't give you much unless you really beg for it. What I will say is that every bit of lore and each boss and interesting NPC I come across shows me that there is something there worth discovering. I certainly won't be the one to do it, but I look forward to watching the hour-long YouTube videos on the backstory of these characters in the world. The lore teases I get every now and then I find to be pretty exciting, but I sure wish they would have given us more exposition or more character interactions where we can hear and learn more about the world and why things are happening the way that they are. I would love to know why it seems the dragons in the land are dying and how this rot that is getting to them is spreading so quickly and where it came from. I would love to learn about the different factions they mentioned, what the politics are like. Heck, I'd even like to know more about my mission in the quest for the Elden Ring, but for some reason they don't give you a lot and they want you to dig for it, which is fine, but it could have made for a really well-rounded experience. Another thing I can't really talk much about is the co-op, but I will share my experience with it. First, let's talk about all the souls of the players you see and the messages they leave. While I think this is an interesting mechanic, it is way overdone here, and overall it's just too much. After about an hour of the butthole jokes and the straight up lies and otherwise unhelpful messages, I just shut them off. They were way more distracting, and the ones they were actually helpful were just spoiling encounters that I would have been more excited to experience myself. But that wasn't even most of the messages. Most of them felt like they were from junior higher notes being passed around class, and talk about immersion breaking. I think if there was some kind of filtering or review process and they didn't show you so many messages and ghosts so often, for it to be so distracting, this could have potentially been a really cool mechanic, but I think it just needs more work first. The first time I tried to summon a friend to fight a boss with, we spent about an hour and a half getting the right items I needed to summon him, messing with both of our settings, placing down his sign, trying out the summon pool, using the different methods, setting passwords, running in and out of the room to try and get his sign to appear, to no avail, by the way. So I didn't get to experience the co-op after all, but I went in to fight the boss I had been having so much trouble with, and like 10 minutes later I had beat him. And that felt so good, especially after trying to summon my friend and not being able to. This is why I think for the most part co-op and other players' messages don't really belong in a game like Elden Ring. I shut all that off and I had a way more exciting and scary experience. This game really makes you feel alone if you let it. It's similar to the tension and fear you feel in a game like Metroid Dread. You are all alone on an alien planet with nothing but hostiles in your mission. I wish they would have put more time into crafting this beautiful single-player experience instead of shoving in a half-finished MMO mechanic into the game. So after all that, do I think you should buy the game? Well, let me put it this way. This game's not for everybody, but I think everyone should try it. Give it a solid couple of hours of YouTube tutorials and a good college try. And if you can make it through your first few encounters into the dungeon to face Margit, then I think you should buy this game. I think you should sink your teeth in. Challenging games like this, by nature, will not be for every person. But if you play it enough to get the itch, I think you will really enjoy fighting against this game and against yourself, so you can get to the point where you really earn a victory in this game. Based on that feeling alone, I think the game is worth $60. But with a game like Elden Ring, asking whether or not to recommend it is simply not enough. With a game like Elden Ring that has so many 10 out of 10 scores from so many prominent video game websites and journalists, you're going to want to ask me, do I think it's a 10 out of 10? So go on, ask me. Oh, thanks for asking. No, it's not a 10. No way. There is way too much stuff in this game that is frustrating for no reason. There is so much obtuse game design and mechanics. It's like the game doesn't want you to play. This is hard, especially because of all of the hype and the popularity around the game. So I won't be the one that tells you to get good, but I will tell you to expect a challenging game that really doesn't like you, and that if that kind of game isn't for you, that's okay. Not everybody wants to spend their free time getting the snot kicked out of them. Sometimes I'll pick up this game and play for less than 2 hours, be so emotionally exhausted for losing over and over and over that I need to set it down and go drink some hot chocolate and roll up in fetal position while I listen to my roommate softly play his banjo in the next room and let out a single tear. So no, I don't think this game is a 10 out of 10, but I will say I think it's a great game. It's a great experience. If you can conquer the game design and the difficulty, then you will absolutely enjoy your time with it. This is a game that if you really invest your time and your skill into it, you can get hundreds of hours of content out of it. It has one of the biggest maps I've ever seen in a non-MMO game. There is a lot here to enjoy, and I for one am having a great time with it. There are some things I would change, and as I said, sometimes I need a good break or even the rest of the day off. But the next time I see a TikTok or an Instagram reel, I just get thinking about that open world again and all the places I can go, and I'm just ready to dive back in. This is my very first video game review I've done in any official capacity, and one of my first proper YouTube videos as well, so I hope you liked it. I'm really looking forward to getting feedback from anybody that stayed this long into the video, so please find me on TikTok or Instagram and DM me about how I'm an idiot and I don't understand anything about game design or something. But please, tell me what you think of the game. How did you enjoy it? What stood out to you about it? Do you think it's a 10? Drop it in the comments and follow me everywhere so you can stay in touch. Share this video with a friend. Maybe somebody who is thinking about getting Elden Ring, or somebody who's talking about how it's the best game ever without considering all the flaws I mentioned. So, thanks for watching. I hope you have a good week.